Serenbe is a place where people live, work, learn, and play in celebration of life's beauty. And we're here to share the stories that connect residents and guests to each other and to nature. This is Serenbe Stories. In today's episode, we're going to talk with UGA professor Alfie Vick about eating plants, taking biophilic principles into all communities, environmental ethics, which he teaches at UGA, as well as his deep understanding of the Native American tribes right here in the southeastern United States. He talks about their history, culture, and practices, which are a great example of living in a balanced life in tune with nature. Alfie also talks about the thousands of native plant species that are here in Georgia, as well as designing natural spaces such as the Children's Garden at the State Botanical Gardens right in Athens, Georgia. He also talks about Serenbe's own medicinal garden, and he's also working on a future neighborhood in Serenbe. But first, Serenbe Stories is brought to you by the Inn at Serenbe. The Inn is nestled in the rolling countryside of bucolic Serenbe, where guests can walk on the 15 miles of trails through preserved forest land, the wildflower meadow, and the animal village. You can relax by the pool, hot tub, or in rocking chairs on the wraparound porch. Play on the croquet lawn, swings, and in-ground trampolines. Connect with nature and each other, all while staying in luxurious rooms on the Inn grounds or within the community of Serenbe. Book your stay today at serenbeinn.com. All right, well, we want to welcome everybody back to Serenbe Stories. I'm Monica Olson, and I've got Steve Nygren here with Alfie Vick.
Hi, Monica.
Hi, guys. How are you?
Glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you. Alfie is the Georgia Power Professor in Environmental Ethics at UGA, which is the University of Georgia here outside of Atlanta. He is a licensed landscaped architect, a lead fellow, and has worked closely with Serenbe to create the Motto Food Forest and medicinal garden over the years. But that is just a tiny bit of what you've been up to. And so we want to hear all about your story, your Serenbe story, and what you're most excited about these days. So I kind of kick it off to Steve to hear how you guys first met, which I don't think I know.
I actually first met Alfie. He was just sitting at a desk at ECOS because ECOS was the planning company that had won the award for the Chattahoochee Hill Country Master Plan Community Engagement. And this is back in 2001. Mm-hmm. But someone else in the office, so Alfie at that point was just on the sort of outskirts. And then various things that happened ran across Alfie. And then when we launched Chattahoochee Now to look at the river, now this is my memory, so you can give your memory if it's the same. Alfie was a key part. And of course, a lot of key people, environmentalists and horticulturalists, Alfie was becoming more and more of a figure in that world once he went to University of Georgia to become a professor. And so he was more involved at those public meetings or at stakeholder meetings we showed up. And it was at one meeting that I think Alfie had presented something. And I said, we're doing this third phase at Serenbe, and it's going to be a lot of medicinal and plus hopefully Alfie will tell us about his studies on Indians, and he's become a real expert on that and some of the things. And so that intrigued me. So I invited Alfie to come down and see what we were up to, and then that led to developing the relationship we have today.
Yeah. I remember those early meetings at ECOS where I was sitting at a desk and you and Shannon Kettering and Carrie Blind were in the conference room, and I think I had a chance to poke my head into a couple of those meetings. And then when you guys had the stakeholder meetings for the Chattahoochee Hill Country planning, I did come and attend and participate in some of that effort as a staff member of ECOS. And that was really the beginning of how I got to know this part of Fulton County and really the area that is now Serenbe.
That's great. And so tell me a little bit about what was ECOS specifically, and how did you go from there to UGA?
ECOS was, I say was because ECOS has now been, subsumed or purchased by one of the other companies in town. But ECOS was a full-service landscape architecture firm, and we were really, I think, pushing the edges of sustainable design and sustainable landscape architecture and site design at the time. And I think that's part of the reason why we were selected to be the the planning team for Chattahoochee Hill
Steve
Country.
is nodding here that yes, that is the reason.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we had a lot of large national in various cities apply, and we really looked at them. ECOS was on that cutting edge, and we thought that they would join us in imagining something very different and lead that effort.
So this was early on before Serenbe was even here, or?
Oh yes, this is when we were bringing the community together in a community engagement. And this is, we had received we partnered with the Nature Conservancy and applied for a grant and received a grant from the Fulton County Economic Development. And that allowed us to put an RFP out.
Okay.
And ECOS won that RFP.
Perfect.
And as Steve said, I was kind of on the periphery of that. I was really running our sustainable design green building studio, and it was Shannon Kettering that was running the planning studio, and she led the effort here. And so had that involvement, and that was almost 20 years ago. And then fast forward to 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, and I was involved with Chattahoochee Now, as Steve said. And after a couple of our big stakeholder meetings with Chattahoochee Now, Steve, I think, had learned about some of my interest in Cherokee ethnobotany and American Indian ethnoecology, and said, "Hey, you need to come out to Serenbe and see what we've done, because we have some pretty cool sites that seem to be, seem to have some resources, some cultural resources that need to be explored." And I said, "Yeah, I'd love to come take a look." And so that was probably 2015 or 16.
About that.
Yeah, it came out, and from that point on, I've been hooked, hooked on what's going on out here.
So Alfie's the one, because that's right. That was our first year really visit and my walking the land with you. So this was before I really talked about motto in our third phase.
Okay. Yep.
And it was to look at our Indian sites. And I've always been curious about the Indian rock that I always called it an Indian still. And Alfie was the one who was really able to validate on a way that this was probably the Mississippians, I believe you said.
Yeah, I think it actually predates the Mississippians. I think it goes back to the woodland era.
Before that. But then you were able to point out one of the most likely Mississippian sites, and it was a mound that you can see from that rock. And because of where it is, according to the stream and the perfect round, he was pretty sure that. So it really helped us put some names on some of these things that we just sort of knew they were Indian, but didn't really understand them.
And go ahead, tell me a little bit more about that time when you were walking the land, because I've been out there, but I don't know much about. Yeah,
it's one of the sites that I think that there not as many Serenbe residents and visitors get to see as should, because it is accessible and there are trails that lead to it, and it's really an amazing site. You get out to a pretty steep hillside, and there is a large boulder with two symmetrical basins carved out of a boulder, and the two basins come together into a central flume that pours off the side of the boulder. So imagine, two sinks that come together into a central drainage flume. And it's way too symmetrical and geometric to be of some kind of natural, origin. And in seeing this, I thought, oh my gosh, clearly this is something of human creation. And I did some research, and there are a number of basins that are identical to the one that is here. Some of them are single basins with a single flume. Some of them are double basins with a single flume. There's a number of different configurations. And the best that we can tell, and this has been documented by research through the U.S. Geological Survey, and it's been published in peer-reviewed publications, is that this thing was created to process acorns into an edible product. So you think of acorns, the product of all the oak trees that are out there. We've got 25 or 30 different species of oaks that are native to this area. Some of them are more palatable than others. I think the white oak is probably one of the more sweeter acorns that are out there. But none of them are acorns that you can just pick off the tree or pick off the ground and pop them into your mouth and eat them. They would make you pucker, and they're just not palatable because they've got so many tannins in them.
Right.
So what the basin is you mush up these acorns, crush them with a rock or, pestle or something, and then you pour water in there, let the water soak, and it actually leaches the tannins out of the acorn. And then you pour some more water in.
Okay.
And as you're filling up the basins, it's pouring over the flume, and basically you're rinsing the tannins out of the acorn, and eventually you end up with an edible acorn mush, which then you dry. And then you ground it up with a mortar and pestle, turn it into an acorn powder, and it can be turned into all kinds of things at that point.
Oh, interesting.
And so you think that's the woodlands now, which is 2,000 years ago?
Yeah.
And it could even date before that.
Yeah.
Because I remember our archaeological dig we had here, and one small item that they thought was probably an agrarian tool carbon dates at 9,000 years old.
Wow.
So
yeah, and we know from archaeology that there has been human inhabitation of the southeastern United States, what is now the United States, for at least 14,000 years, maybe 16,000 years or more.
And some of this area you said was actually agrarian rather than nomadic and hunters.
Yep. Well, it transitioned from nomadic, and then once corn was introduced, it started to become more sedentary communities. And I think the location of our basin here that we were just describing, and the mound that Steve mentioned, those things are located basically on two edges of the floodplain of Cedar Creek. And then the floodplain would have been where corn would have been grown. And you can just imagine, and there are historical accounts, William Bartram and other explorers that came through the Southeast that described miles of cornfields in the floodplains of rivers. And I can just imagine that floodplain here being either massive cornfield, or if that cornfield is left fallow, which it would be done after a few years that it lost its fertility, you'd let it lay fallow, and then it would be grown up in river cane. And river cane, which is our native bamboo species, is still found along the rivers here in Serenbe.
Okay.
And that is an important species that would be used for making baskets and all kinds of other things. And Thomas Peters, who's the director of natural resources and landscape here, actually did his master's thesis on river cane. So he's the expert. You guys could have him on another episode later.
That sounds like
to
a
talk
great
about river
idea.
cane.
Well, are you still teaching the course on Indian history and doing the field trips in the summer?
Yes, every other year I teach a Cherokee ethnobotany course where I take students on a 2.5-week field excursion. We start in North Carolina, in Cherokee, North Carolina, and then come back through North Georgia and follow the northern route of the Trail of Tears all the way to Oklahoma. And we're basically looking at the transition of the Cherokee people from the Southern Appalachians to Oklahoma as a result of removal and the Trail of Tears, which is a really tragic episode, but it's also a story of resilience and an adaptation that the Cherokee Nation, as it exists in Oklahoma today, is thriving by all accounts. They really are doing amazing things, and actually you've seen them probably in the news recently as they are reestablishing some of their sovereign rights as an independent nation. And so it's really amazing to look at that transition and those lessons learned, and think about how it applies to communities today as we face all kinds of challenges with climate change and threats to our communities,
Right.
and how we can look at the Cherokee Nation and how they have, as a people, maintained their identity, their sense of community, their sovereignty, and persevered in hardships that hopefully we'll never understand.
Right.
Every time I hear about the Trail of Tears, I think about when we first bought this land, and a dear friend, Austin Ford, an Episcopal priest, he was very concerned on what side of the river we had purchased on. And I thought a minute, and I said, well, we're on the east side of the Chattahoochee River. And he said, oh, thank goodness. And I said, well, why? What's the difference? And he said, the Creek Indians were on the west side, and there was the trauma of the Trail of Tears. But the Creek Indians in this area were on the east side of the river, and they were not moved, and they were left there and integrated into society. So it's interesting today, where are the Creeks? Are they just integrated into our society versus the Cherokees?
Well, each of the southeastern tribes had their own Trail of Tears. The Cherokee get all the press about the Trail of Tears, and that's understandable. They were the last tribe to really be removed from the Southeast. But each of the southeastern tribes, the Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, Cherokee, and Seminole, each of them had their own removal story. And I think that needs to be recognized, definitely.
Well, we do know that there was at least one family of Creek Indians still at our waterfall as late as 1860, because
That's
when
amazing.
the Robinsons bought the 600 acres that that's part of, on the bottom of the 2-page deed, which was all a transfer for shotguns and mules, and there was no money, there was a note, there are Indians at the waterfall.
That is amazing.
We have no idea how many or what was the community that was there.
Yep. Yeah, and that's not unheard of. Of course, the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, which is located in North Carolina, that's a similar story where there were folks that hid out in the mountains that were not rounded up, and then there's other reasons why there were Cherokee people that remained in North Carolina, and that's the core of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. And so I can understand that there were, Creek Indians that were able to escape removal as well.
And then when we decided we were going to develop this, rather than a groundbreaking ceremony where we penetrated the dirt with a shovel, we found a Creek Indian chief, and we had a blessing of the land, and he brought smoke, and we honored the 4 directions, and everyone who had put a reservation on a lot came, and we all joined hands together and sort of had a bonding moment there.
No, that's great. Well, and you also ended up naming the third neighborhood motto, which my understanding is the Creek Indian word for sort of life and balance. Is that correct?
Yeah, and balance is a really important concept in the Southeastern, what is technically called the Southeastern Cultural Complex, and really understanding, all of the Southeastern tribes, Creek, the ones I just mentioned, and so it's the 5 civilized tribes plus their predecessors, which would have been the Mississippian Cultural Complex and prior to that. But balance was the driving force in the community. And it's probably beyond what we are really ready to understand, I think, in a lot of ways. But it's physical balance, it's cultural balance, it's family balance, and a lot of things that made it difficult for Europeans who were encountering the native people here to understand why they were making the decisions they made, why their community functioned the way it did. And really balance was the driving factor. And it's just a different way of thinking than what we operate under today in our culture at large. and it's not to say that maybe there are opportunities to learn from the past, I think.
I completely agree. I mean, I think that we as a culture, at least America, we definitely are all about this sort of short-term thinking. How are we progressing? It's all about moving forward and forward and forward. And we're really not thinking about the here and now and the presence and actually what we're doing today that might affect tomorrow. It really has kind of turned into this, it's all about forward progression. And I don't know where that came from, but we need to possibly reconsider that.
Well, I hope that there is a way to merge, different ways of thinking together. This is maybe getting out of my wheelhouse.
No, go. No, we talk about anything you want. Yeah.
If you get way off, they can edit it out.
No, I think it's an important topic.
No, I mean, obviously what you're talking about in terms of the way things are is very driven by capitalism and the need for growth.
Yep.
And I think native cultures were about balance and maintaining a healthy, I don't want to say status quo because that's not the right term, but a healthy balance. And that means a lot of things in a good way for the perseverance of the culture. And so, I think there are ways to incorporate prosperity into an idea of balance. It's just, how do we measure prosperity?
Right.
And I think what's going on here at Serenbe is helping to shift that narrative about prosperity from, just how much money do you make, or whatever your typical capitalist measure of prosperity is, to things that get back to community.
Yep.
And how many of your neighbors do you know? How can you rely on the community around you to support you in times of need? And those kinds of things that really are at the core of probably the more traditional concept of balance.
No, and go ahead, Steve. Yeah.
Today, Alfie and I had a tour of almost 40 developers and planners, architects from around the country. And they arrived with curiosity, and I believe as we said goodbye to them, they left with passion. And they understood the balance that you're talking about, Alfie. I really think from the various presentations we had, they had not necessarily connected the dots because of the importance of connecting to nature, the plants you put in, the trees, and how the built environment connect us to one another. And it was just fun watching the faces when they arrived of curiosity and when they left. I don't know how many people, the messages you got, but several people said, I'm going home, I'm changing it, I'm bringing people here, I'm on fire, I'm inspired. It was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's important. I think it's sort of time to wake people up. And part of that awakening is to really rethink how we're living. And everybody's going to have a different version of that. But I think we have to think about, what does prosperity mean? What does wealth mean? How do I reconsider, again, I think your point about connecting with neighbors. And I think, to me, wealth is being able to walk outside and, just be connected to trees and see birds and have fresh air. To me, that's prosperity. So I think what you do and what you're doing with the College of Environment and Design and the students that you're teaching is sort of the future, to sort of invigorate the next generation to care maybe more than we have. I hate to say.
Well, yeah, thank you. No pressure, right?
No pressure. It's all about you, Alfie. It's on your shoulders.
Well, yeah, speaking of pressure, the big question that everyone in Atlanta has been asking is, what about gentrification? And, we got the Beltline going in, and we've seen some of the gentrification going on there. And then we see, Serenbe, which I think for all good reasons is a fairly high-priced real estate market. One of my students is working on his thesis now, and he's looking at, how do we take the ideas of biophilic design, the lessons learned from Serenbe, and how do we bring those to low-income communities? And I think this is a really important question and an important effort. And I've heard Steve say it so many times that what's going on here at Serenbe doesn't have to be high priced.
Right.
But there are some strategies that are important. Like if you're looking at a impoverished community that has suffered disinvestment for years and years and is in really tough times, you don't come in and you don't put in artist designed lampposts. That is not the right solution for that community at that time.
Right.
But there are strategies to begin the process of restoring that community using the lessons learned here at Serenbe as a target for where that community wants to be. And you work in steps. Maybe it's installing street trees to get the forest canopy back. Maybe it's restoring the connectivity of the sidewalks to connect the communities to each other so that they're not disconnected by multi-lane highways that force this, disconnection of the neighborhood. And then as you start to restore those connections, you're facilitating the next step.
Yeah.
And so I think it's not coming in and imposing a grand park to save a community.
No.
But it is looking at what is the target and what are the steps that might happen over 10 or 20 years to get to that target, to let the community be a part of the restoration of their own community in a biophilic way. And I think this is I'm really excited about my student who's going to do this thesis, and I'm going to hold his feet to the fire to do it well. But I think this is how we take the Serenbe model and take it to affordable communities and replicate it everywhere.
Yeah.
And I'm anxious, to do that somewhere, because we have a lot of ideas on how that can happen. And even in the future, pieces of the Chattahoochee Hill Country. Right now we have a lot of affordable housing in Palmetto and the Chattahoochee Hills, so that's not the need. It's more balanced tax base growth. But our partnership with Rural Studio is a real key example, because we have the first 2 cottages that were built outside their program to help demonstrate the reality of building these, what they call 20K houses. That was because that was what the teams got. And so we really were able to permit these, certify these, bid them out to builders, and bring that forward. And the great thing that what they talk about is affordable housing should still have architectural integrity, and it should still have key qualities. That doorknob should still feel good. And we have been in a tendency of trying to build the same size house cheaper, and it ends up not feeling good. And if we look at good design, a lot of communal spaces, smaller things, and I think it's absolutely a crime to have affordable housing that has any kind of an energy bill, because today we can do various ways to really reduce that energy demand. And then we're talking about true housing for people that maybe can't afford a place like Serenbe.
So tell us about some other projects that you're working on right now, Alfie. One of my favorites is the Botanical Gardens at UGA. I took my kids over there who are just about aging out of Botanical Garden kid area, the children's area. But it was the most phenomenal place. I encourage everybody to go on the website and look at pictures. But it was the coolest children's garden I've ever been to. Tell me about how that came to fruition and how you were part of it.
Yeah, I'm very proud to be a part of what's going on at the State Botanical Gardens of Georgia in Athens. And it's really become a destination spot. The State Botanical Gardens got started in the 1980s, and they have really come into their own in the last, I think, 10 years or so. And my involvement started, well, my gosh, you can go back to my time as a student at University of Georgia when I would go out to the State Botanical Gardens to study plants. But really my contribution to the State Botanical Garden was in 2012 when myself and a colleague of mine, John Calabria, and 2 of our grad students who had an assistantship basically produced the master plan update for the State Botanical Garden. And some of the things we proposed were a children's garden, which would replace an asphalt parking lot that was located, it was an existing asphalt parking lot located, right adjacent to the visitor center, and turn that into a children's garden. We proposed creating a new gateway building that would orient people as they came into the botanical garden and welcome them to the place, and a number of other improvements. And I am so happy to say that as I go out there today, I see these things happening. And my involvement now is more of a bystander because the design has gone, the detailed design has gone to other consultants, and I'm there watching this idea come to life. The children's garden exists. It was designed by Coons Environmental Design, which happens to be a graduate of the College of Environment Design. Okay. So Josh Coons and his staff member Cam Berglund did the design, and you're right. It is an amazing place. They really thought about natural materials, a lot of granite and wood, and it's all the kind of place that makes a kid want to just get out and not only explore, but manipulate the environment. They can get in that
There's water
stream channel
and sand,
and clog it up with stones. They can move the sticks around and create forts, but it's all within the kind of the structure of this children's garden that is curated by the garden staff there.
It's incredible with incredible fresh food is growing. So there's sort of two sides. Like when you come into the entrance, there's sort of maybe if you call it like a younger children's area.
Oh, yeah.
And then once you kind of weave your way down a little bit further, there's that huge, almost like nest in the woods, and that's where the sticks are, which I know I took pictures and brought them back for Steve. And it's just like stumps with huge sticks. And so the stumps are of varying sizes, and you can put the sticks from one stump to the next, and you start making this little like fort. And so like my kids, my husband, we're all out there like making forts. And then there's this crazy, I don't know, what's the where you can crawl up and it's almost like you're on a huge netting.
Yeah, it's like a squirrel. I think they call it the squirrel's nest.
It was so cool. Yeah. And you just wanted to sit there and look up into the trees. Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's great for kids and adults.
It appeals to kids and adults. Yep, absolutely. And, I think about, the Spela Hamlet that is probably next in line.
Yep.
Has got a 4-acre public park in the middle of it. And one of my students right now is working on some conceptual designs based on Steve's input and some of the programming that's been communicated to us. And his concept is incorporating a lot of those features. I mean, really taking the idea of how do you make a play space for kids and adults that using all natural materials, basically using the forest around us to incentivize that sense of whimsy and play. And I think it's going to be a great feature to have here. Yeah. And we're really seeing it, around the country and popping up and other countries too, of course. And maybe we're taking some inspiration from some other countries, I think, when it comes to this. Yeah.
And we're going to make sure that this is play of all ages, because you can imagine from the children's garden some of the things we're going to have. But on the tower, which will be sort of like a tree house or an observation tower, we're going to have a zip line down to the wine bar, which is in several cutout containers.
You can only go down once. Once you've had your wine, you can't go back up.
That's up to you. I don't know if we're going to have to monitor that.
There's no going back up the zip line. It's always one way.
One way down.
No, but I think it'll be a very cool place, and I think it's a place that I can see parents when they're feeling energetic, wanting to jump in and play.
Definitely.
But really, I think a lot of times it's going to be parents feeling comfortable sitting at the wine bar or the coffee bar, watching their kids play and going probably berserk in excitement, exploring these things, and probably taking some risks, being daring in a safe setting. But the parents can feel like they might be okay with being a little bit removed from some of that risk. We don't want to encourage the helicopter parenting where you feel like you always have to be, 2 feet behind your kid, making sure they're not doing something. Yeah. And I think what we want to create is a setting where parents feel comfortable letting their kids explore a little bit, and I want to make a distinction between risk and danger. And it's an important distinction because risk is good. Exposure to risk helps a kid learn to navigate risk and navigate life. Danger, we don't want kids exposed to danger. And we need to make sure we're not having spikes sticking out of a tree, whatever. There's not rusty nails sticking out of things. But risk is important. The ability to walk across a log and learn to balance. To learn that if you don't balance or look where you're going, you might fall, and you don't want to fall. So you learn to pay attention.
Yeah, and it's hugely important. We just had Richard Leuven, who did Last Child in the Woods and talked about nature deficit disorder. And it's absolutely vital for kids to grow up with a little bit of risk because you can't learn and you can't make good decisions if you don't have a little bit of that in your life.
Yeah,
you
we
know?
don't want kids growing up in a bubble.
No, we don't want them growing up in a bubble. One of the things I want to touch on, because I sort of mentioned it at the top of the episode, is the food forest and medicinal garden. And so for people who are like, what is that? You know, this is sort of a common word that we use a lot, and you obviously hear a lot. Can you give us a little bit of history and background on food forests, medicinal garden, and sort of what that means and
Sure.
what it's going to be?
Yep. Well, you think about, there are many different ways to incorporate agriculture and food production into an urban environment. There are community gardens. There are people now who are doing foraging in urban environments to, you know, to find the edible plants. And a food forest is simply a intentional landscape that is a food producing landscape that mimics the native forest in terms of its structure. It's got canopy trees, understory trees, shrubs, ground layer species, herbaceous perennials, vines, and root crops. And all of these different layers of the landscape are food producing.
Okay.
And it's intended to be something that does not require annual replanting. So it's something you plant once, and it hopefully perpetuates and continues to produce edible products, food, as we go into the future. And so that's what this design is. It's pretty much all native plants. There's a couple of exceptions, like there's some rosemary out there and some other herbs, but for the most part, it's all native species. And really, I describe it as a microcosm of our Piedmont forest, of what you would find if you were to leave the food forest, walk out on the trails and explore some of the 700 acres of natural areas around Serenbe. You would find the same species growing out there as you find planted in the food forest and medicinal garden. And the idea is to build a confidence in people that our native plants are edible.
I know, wild, right?
Not every single one of them, but many of them are. I mean, I think there are 30,000 plant species, 300. Oh man, I'm going to get the numbers wrong.
Okay.
Don't quote me. It's either 300,000 or 30,000 plant species.
We'll fact check you.
Yeah, I'm going to say 300,000 around the world. And we rely on 30 of them for 90% of our plant-based food.
Wow. 30?
You can think of what you can think
30.
of. I bet you can name the 30
sure,
species.
Yeah, definitely.
Corn,
wheat,
rice, wheat, potatoes, soybeans. So
tomatoes, et cetera.
Yeah, there's so there's 30 species we rely on for 90% of our plant-based food. So what about all the other thousands of species that are out there that are edible, but we're just not utilizing them as a resource?
Chances are they don't have shelf life
Really, yeah.
in today's society.
Yeah, yeah. So
right, where they have to travel hundreds of miles.
yeah, but these are all things that are pretty easily overcome by even traditional plant breeding, as we as humans select individual plants for their good qualities. And there's some great research going on by the Smithsonian Institute and some of the researchers there to look at, there were native species here in the Southeast, some of the native sunflowers, sumpweed, chenopodium, smartweed. There are a bunch of native plants that are now, we pretty much, other than the sunflower, we consider these things to be weeds. But they were the food sources of the Native Americans going back prior to the introduction of corn, because they relied on these native species. And at the time that they were important food products, their food production of those species was much more productive. In essence, the human population had been selecting the better producing individuals of those species. And so the seeds were bigger and you were getting more product from those plants. Now that we don't rely on them, they've kind of reverted back to their relatively unproductive state. But so what these researchers have shown is that you go back to the archaeology, and the seeds of sumpweed or chenopodium or whatever were much larger, 6,000 years ago than they are today, because that was a food source and they were selectively, essentially genetically encouraging the more productive individuals.
Right.
Yeah.
And do you think that those used, like, would they be used as an equivalent to a grain?
Yeah.
Okay. And so you would do the same thing that you would do with any grain?
Yeah. So if we decided all of a sudden that oak species were going to be an important food product, we would be looking for the oak trees that produced the biggest, sweetest acorns.
Right.
And we would say that tree produces the biggest, sweetest acorns. We're going to take those acorns and plant those acorns from that tree, and then see what, and then eventually you start encouraging larger, sweeter acorns.
That, who knows, could be much larger and larger than a typical little acorn that we think of today.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it's something that I had met a gentleman, Bob Quinn, recently, who brought back, or you're going to have to fact check me, I'm going to say it wrong, Kamut, K-A-M-A-T or K-M-U-T seed, wheat. It's like a grain, and he's in Montana, and he has basically brought it back, and it's now sort of a grain that he's produced and on his thousands of acres. And so I wonder if it would be the same thing, that we could do that here if there was a southeastern grain that could be productive. I mean, you hear all these challenges with GMO and conventional wheat. Nobody wants to eat it anymore for the various reasons.
Yep. Yeah, I think the potential is there, and I think the key to making sure that potential remains is that we preserve biodiversity and we conserve natural areas, and we work to manage our natural areas well, and prevent the spread of invasive exotic species.
Yeah.
There's a lot of just general responsible land management to preserve biodiversity that ensures that we have these genetic resources into the future when we determine that it is necessary for us to, explore that resource more. So
is there anything else you want to share with us that you're doing or you're working on? I'd love to hear about your graduate student. Is there any other projects or?
Well, I always talk about Serenbe as a living laboratory for my students, and I hope that that's okay with you guys, that we kind of study you all.
Absolutely, we love it. That's what we're here for. That's one of the reasons we're here.
Now we've got a water quality monitoring program in place for Serenbe now, that we're looking at. Really wanting to look at the watershed and understand how all the development practices that are going on here, how are those impacting water quality, through the period of development and construction, and then through, before and after. And so we're looking at all of that. I had a student recently do her thesis on biophilic design, and she interviewed Serenbe residents and non-Serenbe residents and looked at the impact on health and well-being of biophilic design. And that was, amazing research that showed statistically significant higher levels of health and well-being, environmental awareness, and then nature connectedness. And those are three actual measures that have been surveyed around the world, for many years. So those three values were, there's some precedence for those three things. And Serenbe residents scored higher on all three of those in a statistically significant way. There's ongoing research that needs to happen to understand why that is. I think part of it is that living at Serenbe in a community like this, where you have access to nature, does help to improve those measures. I think there's a little bit of self-selecting, that people who are drawn to nature want to come to Serenbe. So what we want to do is do future studies where we can say, how do we sift this out and understand how much of the benefit is self-selection of people that choose to come here because of what it is, and how much of the benefit is people, moving here and reaping the benefit of living at Serenbe. So there's that kind of stuff going on. I'm working with Steve on a summer study away. We're calling it the UGA Biophilic Academy at Serenbe. And this will be an 8-week program that is open to design students of any discipline, architecture, landscape architecture, interior design, et cetera, to come to Serenbe and for 8 weeks be here over the summer studying biophilic design, placemaking, and environmental ethics. And they'll do that through UGA, but it'll be open to students from any university around the country.
That's incredible.
And to professionals. And ideally, that's just the tip of the iceberg to really opening the door to year-round programming that we're working on.
That's incredible. Now, how do students apply to that?
That would be through the University of Georgia Office of Global Engagement.
Perfect. And how do we get in touch with you, Alfie? Do you have any social media that you want us to follow you on, or?
Yep. I think the easiest way to contact me would be through the College of Environment and Design at the University of Georgia. That's ced.uga.edu. And you can find me on the faculty webpage there, and my contact info is all located there. I'm happy to certainly respond to any emails, or
great.
I think you can track me down through you folks here at Serenbe as well.
Perfect. Well, we'll put up some links on our website. Well, thank you so much for your time. This has been fascinating. And I feel like I want you to start doing some tours to educate everybody about the Creek Indians and take them on walks so I can learn more about the history.
We did one a couple of years ago, and I think we need a new one.
Okay.
We do. It's great. So
yeah.
All right. Look out for one next spring, maybe.
Yep, absolutely.
It's been such fun just talking about all the things that we've done in the past, and even more exciting, what's happening in the future. So
absolutely,
we really appreciate your passion and knowledge and how you're applying it here at Serenbe, and in a way that we can expose other people to these very simple principles.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to Serenbe Stories. New episodes are available on Mondays. Please rate and review the podcast, and make sure to email your questions for Steve Nygren to stories@serenbe.com. You may even get to hear them on the podcast. More details about episodes and guests are available on our website, serenbestories.com.